There is a fruit that grows wild across 26 states in America, from the hills of Appalachia to the banks of the Mississippi River. It tastes like a creamy blend of banana, mango, and pineapple. It contains 3 times more vitamin C than an apple, nearly 40 times more iron, and over 20 times more magnesium. Native American tribes cultivated it for thousands of years. Thomas Jefferson planted it at his home in Monticello. It literally saved the Lewis and Clark expedition from starvation when they ran out of food in September of 1806. And yet, today, you cannot find this fruit in a single grocery store in America. Not one. The largest edible fruit native to North America has been completely erased from our food system. This is the story of the pawpaw, and why the modern world decided to forget it. I spent over 30 years working in agricultural genetics, studying how plants are bred, selected, and brought to market. And in all that time, I never encountered a story quite as strange as this one. A fruit that fed presidents, that sustained explorers, that was cultivated by indigenous peoples for millennia, has simply vanished from American commerce. You can buy mangoes from India and dragon fruit from Vietnam at your local supermarket, but you cannot buy a pawpaw, even though it grows wild in the forests just outside town. The pawpaw tree grows as an understory plant in the hardwood forests of eastern North America. It reaches heights of about 35 feet, though some trees grow as tall as 45 feet in ideal conditions. The leaves are large and tropical looking, sometimes reaching 12 inches long, which is unusual for a tree that grows in temperate climates where winters can be harsh. In fact, the pawpaw is the only temperate member of a family of plants called the Annonaceae, which includes tropical fruits like the cherimoya and the soursop. All of its relatives grow in warm climates near the equator, but somehow the pawpaw adapted to survive freezing winters and hot summers across the eastern half of the United States. It is a tropical fruit that learned to live in the cold, and that alone makes it remarkable. The fruit itself is unlike anything else you will find in North America. Each pawpaw can weigh anywhere from less than an ounce to over a pound, though most fall somewhere in between. It looks like a short, fat mango with yellowish-green skin that turns brown and soft as it ripens. Inside, the flesh ranges from pale yellow to deep orange, with a texture that people often describe as custard or pudding. The flavor is complex and hard to pin down. Some people taste banana and vanilla. Others detect notes of pineapple, mango, or even cantaloupe. A famous American plant scientist named E. Louis Sturtevant once described it as a natural custard, too luscious for the relish of most people. An Ohio botanist named William Werthner wrote that the fruit has a tangy wild wood flavor peculiarly its own, and that only a boy can eat more than one at a time because it is so rich and filling. The history of the pawpaw in North America stretches back further than most people realize. Long before European explorers arrived on this continent, Native American tribes were eating and cultivating pawpaw trees. The Cherokee, the Iroquois, and the Shawnee all grew pawpaw in their communities. The Uchi, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Catawba tribes selectively cultivated pawpaw orchards near their towns, carefully choosing the best trees and spreading them across the landscape. In fact, one tribe called the Natchitoches, who lived in what is now Louisiana, had a name that some historians believe translates to pawpaw eaters. That is how central this fruit was to their identity and their way of life. Scientists believe that the pawpaw has an even older history, one that connects it to animals that no longer exist. The large seeds of the pawpaw were originally dispersed by megafauna, giant animals, like mastodons, mammoths, and giant ground sloths that roamed North America until about 10,000 years ago. These massive creatures would eat the fruit whole and deposit the seeds far from the parent tree in their dung. When these animals went extinct at the end of the last ice age, the pawpaw lost its primary seed dispersers. The fact that the tree survived at all is remarkable, and it suggests that Native Americans may have stepped in to fill the role of the vanished megafauna, deliberately spreading pawpaw seeds across the landscape and ensuring the survival of this ancient fruit. The first written record of Europeans encountering the pawpaw comes from the year 1541, when the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto led an expedition through the southeastern part of North America. His chroniclers wrote about finding Native Americans east of the Mississippi River who were cultivating a strange fruit that the Spanish had never seen before. They described it as being similar to the tropical papaya they knew from the Caribbean, and this confusion over names has persisted ever since. The word pawpaw itself comes from early European explorers who mistook it for the papaya, even though the two fruits are completely unrelated. When English colonists arrived in Virginia in the early 1600s, they quickly learned about the pawpaw from the local Powhatan people. A settler transcribed the Powhatan word for the fruit as asimina in 1612, describing it as a wheat plum. This Native American word eventually became the scientific name for the pawpaw genus, Asimina, which is still used by botanists today. The most common species, Asimina triloba, gets its name from the three-lobed shape of its fruit. Perhaps the most famous story about pawpaws in American history involves the Lewis and Clark expedition. In September of 1806, as the Corps of Discovery was racing down the Missouri River to return to civilization after their epic journey across the continent, they ran desperately, low on food. Their biscuits were nearly gone. The deer they hunted were scrawny and provided little meat. But along the banks of the Missouri, they found pawpaw trees loaded with ripe fruit. On September 18th, 1806, the men declared that they could live on pawpaw alone until they reached the first white settlement, which was still 150 miles downstream. The fruit literally sustained them through the final stretch of their historic journey, and they arrived in St. Louis on September 23rd. There is a detail from the Lewis and Clark journals that reveals just how much the men relied on this fruit. Some of the expedition members actually got sick from eating too many pawpaws, developing inflamed and swollen eyes. Captain Clark initially believed it was sunlight reflecting off the water that burned their corneas, but later scholars suggested the men may have had an allergic reaction to compounds in the fruit's skin, which they touched with their hands and then transferred to their faces and eyes. Despite this setback, the expedition pressed on, and the pawpaw remained their primary food source until they reached civilization. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States and a passionate gardener, grew pawpaw trees at his plantation in Monticello, Virginia. He understood the value of this native fruit and wanted to preserve it for future generations. George Washington was also said to enjoy pawpaw, and the fruit was a common part of American life throughout the 1700s and 1800s. People ate it fresh from the tree, baked it into pies and breads, and made it into preserves and drinks. It was not an exotic curiosity. It was a familiar food that Americans knew and loved. So what happened? How did a fruit that was so beloved by Native Americans, by founding fathers, and by ordinary Americans for centuries simply vanish from our food system? The answer lies in a combination of factors that all came together in the 20th century to push the pawpaw into obscurity. The first problem is that pawpaws have an incredibly short shelf life. Once the fruit is ripe, it lasts only 2 to 3 days at room temperature before it begins to ferment and spoil. Even under refrigeration, it only keeps for about a week. Compare that to an apple, which can be stored for months in a cold room, or a banana, which can be picked green and shipped across oceans before ripening in your kitchen. The pawpaw simply cannot compete in a food system built around long-distance transportation and extended storage. The second problem is that pawpaws bruise extremely easily. Their soft, custard-like flesh is delicate and vulnerable to damage. If you try to pack pawpaws into boxes and ship them across the country, they arrive as a mushy, brown mess. The fruit does not travel well unless it is frozen, which changes its texture and limits how it can be used. This made it nearly impossible for pawpaws to enter the commercial supply chain that developed in the 20th century. The third problem is that pawpaws cannot be picked early and ripened later like many other fruits. Bananas, for example, are harvested green and hard, then exposed to ethylene gas to trigger ripening at their destination. Pawpaws do not work this way. They must ripen on the tree to develop their full flavor and sweetness. If you pick them too early, they never develop properly. This means the harvest window is extremely short, usually just a few weeks between late August and early October, and the fruit must be eaten or processed almost immediately. The fourth problem is time. A pawpaw tree takes 7 to 8 years from seed to produce its first fruit. Compare that to strawberries, which can produce fruit in their first year, or apple trees, which typically fruit within 3 to 5 years. For farmers looking to make a living, waiting nearly a decade for a harvest is simply not practical, especially when the fruit cannot be stored or shipped effectively once it finally arrives. When refrigerated trucks and trains transformed the American food system in the early 20th century, fruits that could survive long journeys became dominant. Apples from Washington State could be shipped to New York. Oranges from Florida could reach Minnesota. Bananas from Central America could arrive in every corner of the country. But the pawpaw, with its delicate flesh and short shelf life, was left behind. It could not adapt to a food system designed for durability and distance rather than freshness and flavor. There was also no economic incentive to develop the pawpaw for commercial production. Unlike apples and oranges, which had been bred for centuries in Europe before coming to America, the pawpaw had no established varieties optimized for farming. No one had invested in creating pawpaw cultivars with longer shelf life, firmer flesh, or more uniform ripening. The fruit remained essentially wild, with all the variability and unpredictability that implies, and so the pawpaw faded from American life. By the mid-20th century, most people had never heard of it. The fruit that had sustained Native Americans for millennia, that had fed Lewis and Clark on their historic journey, that Thomas Jefferson had grown at Monticello, became a forgotten relic of the past. Today, you can walk through any supermarket in America and find fruits from every corner of the globe. Mangoes from Mexico, kiwis from New Zealand, dragon fruit from Vietnam. But you will not find a single pawpaw, even though it grows wild in the forests just outside town. Now let me tell you about the nutrition that makes this disappearance even more tragic. According to research from Kentucky State University, which has one of the only dedicated pawpaw research programs in the country, the pawpaw is nutritionally superior to many common fruits in almost every measurable way. Pawpaw contains 3 times as much vitamin C as an apple. It has twice as much vitamin C as a banana. It contains 6 times as much riboflavin as an apple, and twice as much as an orange. The niacin content of pawpaw is 14 times higher than apple and 4 times higher than orange. These are not small differences. These are dramatic nutritional advantages that most people have never heard about. But the mineral content is where pawpaw truly shines. 100 grams of pawpaw contains 7 milligrams of iron. The same amount of apple contains just 0.18 milligrams. That means pawpaw has nearly 40 times more iron than apple. For magnesium, pawpaw contains 113 milligrams per 100 grams, while apple contains only 5 milligrams. That is more than 20 times the magnesium. Pawpaw has 9 times more calcium than apple, 3 times more potassium, and over 50 times more manganese. Pawpaw also contains more protein and more healthy fats than most fruits. It has 1.2 grams of protein per 100 grams, compared to just 0.19 grams in apple. It contains essential amino acids that are rare in fruit, including isoleucine, leucine, lysine, and valine. The fat content, while still low, is higher than most fruits and consists primarily of healthy, unsaturated fats. Have you ever tried a pawpaw? Have you ever even seen one? I would love to know in the comments how many people have actually tasted this forgotten fruit. The good news is that the pawpaw is not truly extinct. It still grows wild in forests across 26 states, from New York to Nebraska, from Ontario to Florida. In some places, you can find pawpaw patches along rivers and streams, in the understory of hardwood forests, waiting to be discovered. The trees spread through underground root systems, forming clonal colonies that can persist for decades or even centuries. And there is a small but growing movement to bring the pawpaw back. Kentucky State University has been running a pawpaw research program for years, developing new cultivars with improved characteristics for commercial production. Researchers are working on varieties with longer shelf life, better shipping tolerance, and more consistent quality. Some farmers, particularly those interested in organic and sustainable agriculture, have begun planting pawpaw orchards, attracted by the fact that the trees require almost no pesticides or herbicides. In Ohio, which designated the pawpaw as its official state native fruit in 2009, there is an annual Ohio Pawpaw Festival that celebrates this forgotten treasure. Thousands of people gather to taste pawpaw ice cream, pawpaw beer, pawpaw bread, and fresh pawpaw fruit. Chefs experiment with pawpaw in everything from curries to cocktails. For a few weeks each fall, the pawpaw enjoys a moment of recognition before fading back into obscurity. If you want to taste a pawpaw, your best option is to find them yourself. The trees grow wild in forests throughout the eastern United States, and once you learn to recognize their distinctive, large leaves and tropical appearance, you will start noticing them everywhere. The fruit ripens in September and October, falling from the tree when it is ready to eat. You can also find pawpaw at some farmers markets during the short harvest season, though you often have to arrive early before they sell out. Growing your own pawpaw tree is another option, though it requires patience. You can order seeds or seedlings from specialty nurseries, but remember that the trees take 7 to 8 years to produce fruit. You will also need at least 2 genetically different trees for cross-pollination, since pawpaws cannot fertilize themselves. Plant them in well-drained soil with some shade when they are young, then gradually expose them to more sunlight as they mature. The trees are remarkably hardy once established, surviving harsh winters and requiring little care. The story of the pawpaw is really a story about what we have lost in the pursuit of convenience. Our modern food system is a marvel of efficiency, delivering fresh produce from around the world to our local stores year-round. But that efficiency comes at a cost. We have optimized for durability, uniformity, and shelf life, often at the expense of flavor, nutrition, and diversity. The pawpaw could not survive in this system, so we simply forgot about it. But the pawpaw has not forgotten us. It still grows in the same forests where Native Americans cultivated it thousands of years ago. It still produces the same creamy, tropical tasting fruit that sustained Lewis and Clark on their journey home. It still contains the same remarkable nutrition that our ancestors valued so highly. The pawpaw is waiting for us to remember. There is something profound about a fruit that refuses to conform to our modern expectations. The pawpaw will not be picked green and shipped across the ocean. It will not sit on a shelf for weeks waiting to be purchased. It will not be bred into a uniform, flavorless commodity. It demands to be eaten fresh, at the peak of ripeness, close to where it was grown. In a world of industrial agriculture and global supply chains, the pawpaw is a reminder that some things cannot be mass-produced. Some pleasures must be sought out and savored in their own time and place. The pawpaw teaches us that nutrition and convenience are often at odds. The most nutritious foods are frequently the most perishable. The most flavorful fruits are often the most fragile. When we optimize our food system for efficiency and profit, we inevitably lose something precious along the way. The pawpaw is a symbol of everything we have sacrificed in the name of progress, but it is also a symbol of hope. The fact that the pawpaw still exists, still grows wild in our forests, still produces fruit every fall, means that we have not lost it forever. We can still choose to seek it out, to plant it in our yards, to support the farmers and researchers working to bring it back. We can still taste the fruit that our ancestors treasured, that explorers relied upon, that presidents grew in their gardens. The pawpaw is not extinct. It is just waiting to be remembered. If you found value in this, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this story. There is so much more to uncover.